We're continuing our origin film series today with Cam Ward. It's a very interesting story, and it's one that's already been covered a whole lot by ESPN, by NFL Network, throughout his last season at Miami, throughout the draft process. We're just going to take a bit more of a recruitment perspective of it. I think that the mainstream media kind of focuses on it as the story of Cam Ward. We kind of want to look at it as the process of Cam Ward. Why was Cam Ward missed? Just to kind of rehash the story, to go over it really quick. Came out of Columbia in Texas as a zero-star recruit. Columbia High School that ran a bit of a wing T offense, a bit more of a high school offense. So it wasn't a whole lot of film for him to get a whole lot of passing reps on his highlight tape. That's the story. Ended up at Incarnate Word as a zero-star recruit. Played his ass off there, transferred to Washington State. Played his ass off there, transferred to Miami. Played his ass off there, went first overall. So throughout this video, I'm going to reference an article from Dave Campbell's Texas football website. I'll put that in the description. So first, looking at the high school film, I watched both the junior year, watched the senior year film. I actually was surprised how good of a high school quarterback this was. The story that you hear about him is that they ran a wing T offense, didn't have that many downfield throws on his highlight tape. I think there was enough to get recruited, so I'm not really going to buy that the film itself, when you take a look at it, you're not convinced of the arm talent because the junior year film is pretty similar to the senior year film. This is the senior year film. Why does it matter? Because it's a lot easier to sell yourself as a quarterback if you're a junior in high school, just because you have more time to convince these schools that you're worth an offer, right? If we just saw the senior year film, this stuff happens 2 months before signing day. It's kind of hard for a team to change their whole recruiting strategy based on just the senior year highlight tape. Anyways, what does he do well in high school? I definitely think you see the arm talent. It's easy for me to say after knowing that he's a Heisman type quarterback at Miami after 5 years of college football. Played really well at Washington State, played really well at Incarnate Word before that. It's easy for me to say that, but I think, if I was evaluating now, first of all, if this dude was in the 2026 cycle, his film would have never found my computer. You take a look at the players I watch, we are just not getting too deep. We're not getting deep enough to watch the Incarnate Word offer list. So this is a guy that never would have found my computer. I never would have watched him coming out of high school. So if I did find him, I'd be pretty surprised that this dude didn't have an FBS offer, to be completely honest. I think the arm talent's good enough at 6'2", 225. I really like his frame. I think not the best athlete, but good enough to get it done. And I think that's what you saw Cam Ward do at Miami last year. Not a guy that's going to go crazy on the ground, just when the play breaks down. You see a lot of the play extension stuff. That is something that you don't see in the high school film, I'll tell you right now. You see him with the ball in his hands, a good enough athlete, but you don't really see the play extension stuff, the off-script stuff. That's not something I don't think you have to see in the high school film. If you trust the arm talent, if you trust the athleticism, I think you recruit the guy. Maybe the off-platform stuff comes down the road, but so it's so easy for me to say, yeah, Cam Ward should have been more highly recruited. No shit. This dude almost won the Heisman in 24. Great college football player. Went first overall, for Christ's sake. Why? Of course, I'm going to watch the high school film and be like, yeah, we should have seen it coming. The question's more of why didn't we see it coming? And I think to kind of understand that, you have to appreciate the chain reaction nature of college football recruiting. There's kids that will have completely no offers when the week starts. All of a sudden, Texas State will offer him on Monday. All of a sudden, Houston will offer him on Tuesday. Then Texas A&M will offer him on Wednesday. And then all of a sudden, by Friday, this dude's the future of the Texas Longhorns football team. You'll see a lot of these kids just have these meteoric rises in the way that they get recruited from their sophomore to their junior year, then their junior year to the senior year. All it takes is like I said, it's really the butterfly effect, right? Dude, however it happens, dude, Texas State just found out about him on a forum maybe they were on. It's just the most random shit when you really think about it. So anyways, Cam Ward ended up getting his Incarnate Word offer after attending a junior year camp going into his senior year. Really impressed one of the coaches there. They took a look at him, like 6'2", 220. This kid's throwing the piss out of the ball. How is this kid not recruited by any school? How is he? How do we have a chance at landing this dude at Incarnate Word, an FCS school? And from then they started recruiting him. But he also attended a Texas State camp that offseason. He also attended a Texas A&M camp that offseason. They just didn't happen that the quarterback coaches there, watched him and then really got wowed. And, just as easily, maybe that those coaches were watching somebody else. Maybe they're in the bathroom when Cam Ward threw. But I have to believe that there is realities where, he goes to that Texas State camp. He just lights it up and he might have lit it up, but just say the quarterback coach noticed him, talked to him, gave him an offer after watching the film, and then, that chain reaction kind of kicks off. So with Cam Ward, I just think we can say that chain reaction never kicked itself off. It never kicked itself off in high school, that is. By the time he got to college, he played his ass off, like I said, at the FCS level. That made Washington State feel like they were in a position to offer him a starting job, and then, did even better in the Pac-12. And then that gave Miami the chance to look at him as a starting quarterback. And then that gave, the Tennessee Titans the chance to look at him as a starting quarterback. So I think that the story with Cam Ward is just to appreciate, the change. The change just didn't get kicked off until he was in college football. I think this is a dude that, did end up a 0-star, but just as easily could have been recruited as maybe a 3-star. I'm not saying I'm watching the film and I'm seeing a 5-star athlete and I could have told you that this dude was going to win the Heisman. That's not the case at all. He got a lot better. That, like I said, the play extension stuff that made Cam Ward such a good quarterback in Miami, you don't really see that in the high school film. And that's one of the big reasons that the Tennessee Titans took him first overall. But, like I said, just with the tangible stuff, really good frame, really good arm. I do think this is a kid that could have ended up on an FBS roster the first time around. Wouldn't have to kind of earn his stripes at the FCS level. I do think that there's realities where Cam Ward, like I said, dude, maybe at the Texas A&M camp that one of the coaches noticed him and then offered him. Just didn't happen. Just not the reality we live in. But the story to learn is just, I think, with this one is just to appreciate the chain reaction. And then I also think it opens up an interesting transfer portal conversation. A lot of people are anti-transfer portal, and I understand they don't like having half of their roster turnover every year. But it's also it's pretty efficient because it kind of lets these under-recruited prospects earn their stripes at lower rated football and then kind of climb their way up. Cam Ward's a dude that literally every level of football almost, outside of JUCO, it feels like, just did a great job at every level, just got a little better. And then we're talking about him as the best player in the 2025 NFL draft. He ended up going first overall. So, really interesting conversation to have. I'm curious on what other people think about Cam Ward. You guys tell me, watching the high school film, I know it's easy to say after the fact, like, yeah, well, I would have liked him. I'm not saying this dude would have been my favorite quarterback. I just think that you see the flashes with the arm talent, and then that plus the frame. I think this is a dude that just as easily could have ended up going FBS. But anyways, you guys let me know what you think about Cam Ward in high school. Good, really good NFL, going to be a good NFL player, I think. Let me know what you guys think. Thanks for watching.